my name is Desa Daniel, and I am Division 45 Student Rep, and welcome to our virtual mentorship program. Today, I am really excited to bring you Roberto and Alexia, who are two colleagues that I treasure. They are amazing scholars. They do a ton of teaching, a ton of research, and just overall are known in our community for the advocacy work they do as well. So I'm excited to have them here. We're talking about diversity in teaching, but we're going to cover a little bit of everything having to do with mentorship. So Roberto, Alexia, welcome. I will let you guys introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Alexia DeLeon. I currently teach at a small liberal arts college that is predominantly white institution, and I am a counselor educator. I specialize in addictions work. So I am a co-director of my current program, Professional Mental Health Counseling, Addiction Specialization. And then I also direct a program at our training clinic downtown that's connected to the college, and that's Latino Problem Gambling Services.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. And Lisa, first of all, thank you for having me here and inviting me to this talk. So my name is Roberto Abreu, and I'm an assistant professor at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. So TSU is a historically Black college, so I've never taught or being trained at a historically Black college. So it definitely has been a shift, for me. Different strategies and things that I'm learning just in my teaching and in my own mentorship. So my research is with Latinx LGBT issues broadly, and more specifically working with families and communities on kind of uncovering and understanding better what does acceptance looks like in my communities. I also teach in the doctoral program and the master's program here at Tennessee State University, and I'm a trained counseling psychologist.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your very busy schedules, I'm sure. So I really wanted to start with, and you both kind of spoke to being a counselor educator versus being a counseling psychologist. So what brought you down that career path? Because I know that we have a lot of audience members who are maybe in their master's program and both options are available to them because they're, say, doing a clinical mental health master's, so they could be a counseling psychologist or they could be a counselor educator. So for you, what was that pathway like? And then how did you ultimately decide for your Ph.D. programs?
I can go. I can go. So actually, that is actually that's a great question. So my PhD is in counseling psychology. However, my master's degree is in counselor educator from a K-12 program. So my undergrad was in biology education, so nothing to do with mental health field. But specifically, we're talking from going from a master's in counselor education to counseling psychology. What is just wanting something different? I mean, I love my master's program. I think a strong focus on multiculturalism, diversity, social justice. And I was like, well, I would like a different experience, but that still feels somewhat similar. And I feel that's why I was very intentional about the different psychology programs or specifically counseling psychology programs I was looking for. I still wanted that multicultural diversity, social justice piece, while doing something different, being slightly different but similar field, if that makes any sense. Which is also interesting because people often ask, like, so are you a counselor educator or are you a psychologist? I'm like, I'm both, and I own that. I think I've learned different excellent things from those two different yet similar fields.
For me, I always knew that I wanted to teach at the university level. I had no idea that counselor education existed, but I also wanted to be a counselor. But my undergrad is in psychology. And so I'm a first generation college student. And so I always assumed that I would be a professor of psychology. And so I took a really long break after my bachelor's, and chose to get into a master's program for counseling. But the program was called counselor education, but I had never heard that term before. And so once I got into the actual program, I was just really intentional in reaching out to my professors during their office hours and learning more about what they did, because I really wanted to do that. And so, yeah, I think for me, it was being intentional about really wanting to teach students. You know, as I was going through my own developmental process, that was really difficult, but also very rewarding. I just always wanted to be on the other end of that, you know, because I was looking up to my professors and just, you know, really fell in love with the counseling profession and counselor education. So I linked up with one of my mentors in my master's program who encouraged me to go to a doctoral program within counselor education that was actually going to focus heavy on teaching versus research, because I knew that I really wanted to teach more than anything, and be in small classrooms with students and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that it's almost like counselor education has become more of almost a global term for programs, but it's not necessarily always very clear what that means, where it really comes down to training, right? So I wouldn't even think that a counselor education program would lean more towards teaching, because my program does not. Versus in counseling psychology, I know that teaching and research, and it's like almost like this like awkward 25% and a little bit of everything you're doing to like make you an overall like clinician, researcher, teacher. But really, like how you said, Alexia, being intentional about your pathway and like what you really want to gain out of your program, I think is something I want to highlight for students, because your program looks differently no matter where you go. Like not every program, APA or KCREP, is the same. And so how do you really be more intentional, get your own mentors, it sounds like, who can have those conversations with you as well. So I really appreciate what you guys said on that. And something that stood out to me a lot was you talked about multicultural diversity and social justice. So either in the clinic you're working at, Alexia, or for you, Roberto, like really putting that as the focus for applying to programs, but then also the training you would get. And so as you're now doctors, how are you incorporating that multicultural social justice advocacy framework or like cultural lens to the work you're doing now? You guys are so proper.
I know.
You're like,
I think we're like wanting to be respectful.
Yeah,
I think that really shows up in my teaching more than anything. I'm really passionate in my pedagogy and highlighting marginalized voices in the classroom. And I'll even have process comments, you know, after, for example, a student of color speaks and, you know, everybody shifts the conversation in another direction. You know, I'll say, hey, you know, did you all notice what just happened there? You know, so-and-so said this thing. And then we quickly shifted to this thing. And that's what like initially comes to mind for me. You know, where I'm at currently is very LGBT diverse, but not super ethnically, culturally diverse. And so that's just kind of like the thing, I guess, that's at the forefront, is that I am at a predominantly white institution, and I am a woman of color. And so, you know, I see that quite a bit. So that, yeah, for me, it's that. And I think just my passion for not just teaching, but social justice and diversity in general. That, you know, if we're going to teach something, for me, it's like, I want to do something that I personally enjoy, as well as tying that into my professional career. And so for me, I'm, you know, always ordering books online around multiculturalism, diversity, social justice, even in other disciplines.
Yeah.
Higher education. You know, I just that intrigues me. I want to learn, how to better deconstruct the system, even higher education, for example, because it wasn't really built for people like me. And, I want to break down those barriers and continue creating access for other people who look like me or other marginalized identities, because representation is really important. And they need to see people like us teaching their classes. And I think whenever we bring that passion and share, in that vulnerable space, even sharing our own testimonials, for example, that allows students to bring their full authentic selves as well. And I think it's really a really intriguing process, to kind of like spark that interest in them, right? Like if they see me really passionate about being a social change agent, then that kind of for them is like, oh, I want to be like that. And it goes back to, I think when I was a master's student, looking up to my professors who were doing those types of things and taking me to conferences, and having me present with them, trusting me as a master's student. And so that's something that I really try to be mindful of is, how can I take these master students to present with me, right? Because we present all the time. That's really easy for us. Yeah. Job. And so that was a big deal to me, like as a little brown girl, from West Texas, rural West Texas, like I, going to conferences, flying for the first time, all of those things were huge for me. And to be able to stand up at a conference and present with my mentors just really went a long way. And so that's what I want to do for students.
And yeah, a lot of that actually resonates with me. From the teaching perspective, I definitely agree on the process piece. I always tell my students, like, you're extremely intelligent. That's the reason you're here in a PhD program and a master's program, right? You can read this book and you can regurgitate the book and you can pass the test. I mean, I am sure of that. But the process piece, it is the part that's going to make you grow. And I don't mean like grow is going to be roses all the time. We're going to disagree with each other. We have, all of us have different marginalized and privileged identities, and we're going to step on those at some point, and that is okay while we have a safe space here to be able to process that. So to me, that is the biggest piece when it comes to the teaching portion. It's like, okay, there's something happening here, right? So we need to put the book to the side for a minute and talk about this, right? And to me, that is the biggest piece. To me, that is a little bit of that social justice piece in the classroom, right? And then through research, I would say, I love qualitative research, and to me, that is a way to bring voices to. So, for example, I work, Latinx LGBT concerns. Well, guess what? We don't have scales, and we don't have measures, and not a lot of people care. So, yes, doing that qualitative research. So, how do you bring and not speak for somebody, because I don't have to speak for my participants. I don't have to speak for my students. They all have a very strong voice. But how is it that I facilitate for their experiences to be told, right? And in my research, I have found to be that qualitative piece, and keep it true to what they're saying, to their cultural values. So navigating all those intersectional pieces, right? That is the fact that, okay, we have a framework for how to look at this from very white LGBT perspectives, but how does it look like when we look up like respeto and all these gender norms in my community, right? So, and then in the mentorship piece, I think, again, also that process piece, you were saying something, Alexia, about the importance of mentorship, right? And I think that is absolutely correct. And you have your mentors who help you get to the doctoral program or the graduate program. And then there are these other mentors you meet also along the way when you change your mind, when you're stuck with something. So creating that space to let my students know that it is okay to change your mind. It is okay to be stuck. It is okay to not know what to do. Trusting the 3 letters after my names, Do not tell me what to do all the time. So I still have my own mentors I go to all the time. And that is fine. That is not a deficit, that is part of the process. Then that means if you're stuck, that means you're growing. That's great, and we can process that. And if I'm not the person, because I also realize I cannot provide my student everything they need because I'm one person, and I have my own blind spots, and I have my own lived experiences, and I have my own privileged identities, right? So if you don't want to process that with me, trust me, I do not get upset at all. And if I can help you find somebody you can process that with, let's do that. That's okay. So.
Yeah, I love what you said, Roberto, about not just the intersectionality, but it sounds like you're really speaking like to that cultural humility piece. And I think that's huge because we have to create that vulnerable space, right? And so it's really important for us to constantly re-examine, right, like you said, our privileges. And I feel like that goes a long way in the classroom. And even like you said, being collaborative of like, yeah, I'm not always going to get it right. I'm going to screw up, but I can, maybe connect you with somebody else who, maybe you have more things in common or whatever. And that's okay, right? Like we're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it speaks so much to being in our own processes. And so realizing that we don't know everything because we're also still trying to figure out a lot. But even how both of you talked about the transition between like, okay, now that I have 3 letters behind my name, it doesn't mean I just magically knew everything now, right? So then it's a different process for me as well. But then also claiming your truth. So like realizing that diversity looks very different. So I think often we think, oh, like there may be a lot of sexual diversity, so we have a lot of diversity, but then realizing to be the only one that means we don't have it. So whether it's sexual or ethnic, we need to realize that if there's only one, then it's not diverse. And then really highlighting that you're both working from these frameworks of how do I have these conversations with my students, even though they're uncomfortable, because it's important for me to something that's like you said, supporting and elevating voices, and really like that qualitative process, which I think is very cultural and not necessarily like supports this like systematic structure of what academia can often feel like. So for you, I'm wondering, especially when it comes to teaching, what was your first teaching experience like versus what it is like now?
So my first teaching experience was, like I said, my undergraduate was in biology education. So I taught high schoolers for 4 years. That was my very first teaching experience, right? Different age group and all of that. I felt like, adolescents need more structure. But they were a lot of fun. But if I kind of like, and after that I taught undergraduate at the University of Kentucky, and in the education department, and also the College of Health Sciences, and then now at TS2. And if I reflect on my on some things that I have learned and grow from, I don't know exactly how to label it. I think it's something similar to what I said a little earlier. Is like I think I have gone from realizing from like, okay, I'm gonna bombard you with content because this is what's gonna make you grow, to like, okay, let's pause. We don't have to spend a week on this. We can spend 7, and that's okay, because clearly this is where the classes and when you're developing and so forth, right? So focusing more on process than content. Realize, yes, there are the expectations. Yes, you still need to do the paper. You still, you still need to, pass the class. And that, you still need to study for the midterm. You still need to do all these things, right? But, grades do not give you knowledge. Grades just mean like, check, move on, right? So focusing on holding the content piece and the process piece, and realizing that sometimes at least for me, the process takes precedence over the content.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. I really like that. I am similar. My pedagogy is actually sente pensante, which is two Spanish words, sentir and pensar, to sense and to think. So I'm constantly trying to create more of that balance, because I am the type of person that's definitely going to go towards process. And then also remembering, okay, and they also need content, right, to pass some of these national exams and that sort of thing. But I was laughing initially when you asked about our very first teaching experience, because I was really awkward. I way over prepared and had all sorts of notes, and felt like I was like reading way too much stuff off of a PowerPoint slide, and just, I mean, that's not even me at all. Like, it's not who I am. But I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, like I didn't, you don't know what you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. And so I hadn't had an instructional theory course at that point. I thought that I needed to have all the answers and I needed to be prepared, right? Because my own anxiety, I needed to be prepared, for anything that the students were going to ask. And then afterwards, I just remember, my mentor spending time with me, and I was like really upset, and I was crying, and I was like, that was horrible. Like, I did not show them my personality at all. Like, I was up there like a robot hiding behind the podium. Like, that is not me, like I'm funny, I'm goofy, I'm all of these other things. And I was up there like a weirdo, and so it was a lot of time reflecting on like, what is that about? Like, what was I doing? And, some of my own, insecurity, right, of feeling like I needed to know all of the answers. And then now there's much more comfort in like not knowing, of like, you know what, I'm not sure. I don't know much about that. I know a little bit, or I don't know, I've never heard of that at all, and kind of fanning that out to the class. Like, does anybody else, heard of this concept, or does anybody else want to speak on that? My expertise is not really in that specific area. So just more comfort and being me and being okay with, I don't know, I've never heard that before. And I'm also a lot more comfortable now with, because I'm bilingual. And so sometimes I will say to students, it's really funny, because I'll say like, I don't know how to pronounce that word. And, I'm bilingual. And so sometimes, things like just don't make sense to me in sentence structure or whatever. And I'm just a lot more comfortable being me, being authentic, and saying like, I don't see that as a bad thing. I actually see that as a strength. I speak two languages. And so sometimes in my head, if I pause, I'm trying to translate something that came to me in Spanish first, and how do I, put the same emphasis in English, and that sort of thing. But just being more transparent of like, this is me, it's fine. Like, we're going to get through it. It doesn't mean that I'm, less intelligent or anything else. It's just who I am.
Yeah. I love that you shared that, Alexia, because you just reminded me. I was teaching a theories of personality course last semester, and I was like, listen, I don't know how to pronounce a person's last name. I have no idea. This is what I think it is. Probably it's not. But I totally hear that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think you are up 100% correct, and it's a liberating process to realize that, you know what, I can tell them that I just don't know it, but we can find the information together. I don't even know everything, but we can look it up together.
Right.
So that's actually a great question, and I don't have an answer to.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I remember my professors in my master's program doing that. But it's like you forget everything when you're there on stage. But yeah, it's just funny because I think I've learned creative ways, I guess, to like just be okay with that.
Yeah, it just speaks so much to the time we put in. It's almost like when you're talking, Alexia, it reminded me of like my first semester as a doc student versus like now it's my third year. And I'm just like, I'm not worried about it. Like, I just like, it's almost like having more time and experience has made me more authentic because I'm more comfortable with the unknown because there's so much of it. Versus I think that there's almost this fear when you enter a new space to be like, it's almost like, like imposter phenomenon, or like you're sitting there like, I deserve to be here. I worked hard for this degree. I have all the answers. I'm ready. And then you're like, why was I standing like that? That is so weird. Like, or you're just like reflecting. You're just like, I just said the weirdest stuff that just isn't even in my vocabulary. Like, that's just not even. And then you're like, okay, like, let me start over and like come as I'm most comfortable, because then I can show students my real self and they will be more comfortable. And then it's almost like a dramatic shift in the environment, the teaching environment, especially, because then it's like not everyone's not on edge. Like, oh my God, like we have to know all of this. You're just like, I'm a mess. Take me as I am.
Yeah. Well, and it can all be turned into an educational moment, right? Because whenever, like you said, I mean, we can relieve some of their anxiety, right, by not being perfect. And for me, like even as you were talking, I was thinking of like how more self-compassionate I've become with myself. Of like, it's fine, Alexia, like you speak 2 languages, like that's a strength. Like,
yeah.
Like be upset that you can't, pronounce someone's name, or, right now I'm teaching drugs, brain, and behavior. And it's like, sometimes the drug classification names are like super hard to pronounce. And I'm like, it's fine. Like, I don't have a degree in chemistry. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. 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 And that actually leads us directly into our next question. So even just like around this conversation, especially, what would you like tell your past self? So like, what would you tell yourself as a first year doctoral student, or like just entering that process versus like where you are now as a doctor?
Yeah. For me, it would be to trust myself, like to trust that I belong there, because there was a ton of imposter syndrome, as a first generation student, as the only person of color in my entire doctoral cohort. There was just like a lot of assumptions of like, oh, like everybody else knows what they're doing. I'm going to be so behind. Like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. Like, I moved out here, and if I fail, like, what do I tell my parents? Because there were a lot of sacrifices for me to get to this point, and just all sorts of stuff, right? And so it would be, that to trust myself that I belonged there, and also to be kind to myself, like that it's okay. Because just as like counseling as a profession is all about taking risks, like counselor education is the same thing. I can take these risks, and we're in relationship every single day, right, with students and personal relationships, right? Like, we are in the business of relationship. And so for me, it's like I can screw up and I can repair, right? Rupture and repair. And I can trust myself to repair, because I am so relational, and that's really important to me. And, I can bring that cultural humility piece in, like those things that I think go a long ways, in terms of, creating connection with students, for example.
Yeah, definitely along this way. Similar thoughts, Alexia, but also the idea that like I know stuff and I should share that. Saying this idea, at least for me, during my first year, it was more like, well, maybe nobody will be able to relate to this, or this is kind of like a dumb comment, or something like that. So I would tell myself like, actually, those were great comments that people should have heard, and I did get better, with time and mentorship and all that. But that's what I would tell myself, like, make the comments, put your stuff out there. Stuff that people need to know because of your lived experiences that people don't have. So to not minimize myself. And I think I've gotten better. I mean, absolutely better with time. But there's something that it's a learning curve, like own what I know, and this is what I know, and we can learn from each other, and
Right.
So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think finding our voices is so important. And like on any given day, I can feel like really strong and confident in the classroom. And then the next day, I'm like beat up, right? Because we're in the system that is constantly pushing us down. And so it makes sense that that would happen. But I mean, I think it's like we're constantly trying to find our voices and, you know, make our way into these spaces that like were never built for us. But again, that's so important, right? Because when we show up, like our marginalized students our marginalized identities are able to meet us in that space. And it's like so important for them to see people like us.
Yeah, that really resonates with me a lot because I think it feels like there's so much pressure for us as our own underserved populations in terms of these academic spaces, especially to then figure out what's the best way to navigate my own self-care and my own mental health while I'm also trying to support students, right? But then also really like, how do I balance still being my best self, like being warm and being open and being relational, because that's also very important for the work we do. But then still realizing that I am still human and I have bad days. And so a colleague that Alexia and I share, he always tells me, you know, there's always another opportunity to come back and like make something better. And I really like how you said, you know, it's like we rupture and we repair, and we do it a lot because we're also messy humans. So it's like, we don't know everything. You know, like yesterday I finally deleted an email I had since January. So I was like, this is a victory. Like, but realizing that like, it doesn't mean that I don't find that person important. It's just like, there's so much going on. Right. So then I'm wondering for both of you, you know, how do you balance it? How do you balance supporting students, especially who are looking to you as either an ethnic minority or so like as a shared experience in maybe a hostile space, but then also navigating the fact that you could also be the only one as the like expert in the room or like the professional in the room?
So for me, going it's interesting. So I went to school, undergrad and my master's at a Hispanic service institution in Florida. Then I went for my PhD to PWI at UK, University of Kentucky, and now I teach at an HBCU. And I would say for me, this is how can I put this into word? Like I can relate to the students I'm teaching now a lot more, right? They are working, full time. I'm still going to school full time. Like I respect that. Like it's like, yep, I was there. First generation, students. Like, yep, you know what I'm saying. So in that regard, I feel less nervous or anxious or stressed, whatever we want to call it, than I was at UK when I messed up. It's like, okay, they will understand better than the students that I was teaching at the PWI, right? And at the same, so there is a space. Of course, most of our students are Black students, and because it is an HBC, there are a lot more faculty of color, right? So in that respect, in that regard, I think I think that it's great. And also in my department, I'm the only person who does LGBT work. So there is that layer that comes out sometimes, you know what I'm saying? When students do talk to me about it, it's like, okay, well, where can I find the resources to support you in that way as well? So it's interesting that it looks much better from this lens than in this other place. And then I'm also the only person that does this piece in this environment. So how do I also support that, right? And so I think there are always challenges, right? And the challenges will look slightly different or shift depending on the environment, that you are. So to more specifically answer your question, so when LGBT people of color in the environment that are not complete to me, it's like, okay, how can I support you first, right here, right now, right? And then how can I connect you to resources that are in the university? And if there are not many in the university, how can we step outside of that and find those resources in the community? Also, I think, at least for me, one of the better situations is that Nashville is a larger city than Lexington was when I lived in Lexington. And although, I like the city of Lexington and all of that, for sure, there's definitely, I feel like there are more resources in a larger city like Nashville to connect my students to. And then also follow up to see how they're doing. I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am coming from a similar place, like you said earlier, Roberto, that collaboration piece, right? Of like, it doesn't really fall all on us. Like, it feels like it sometimes if there's not a lot of representation. And also we can connect them to community resources, or we can maybe connect them to a professor down the hall who's not in the same department, but maybe that person can better assist them than we can. And so connecting them to other people and not feeling like it all falls on just us. For me, I also have to step back and evaluate a lot of the time how I'm really taking care of myself. Like you were saying earlier, Desa, like how I need to be able to take care of myself in order to replenish, right? And re-energize, because the reality is, and I say this to students all the time, but then it's like having to check myself too, right? Of like, there's no possible way we can fight every single battle and every single injustice. There's no possible way. I am at a predominantly white institution, predominantly white city. It's just impossible, right? And so being kind to myself and like, okay, you don't have the emotional energy for that battle today. And you need to replenish, regroup, and maybe you'll come back to it and maybe you won't, and that's okay. Because, you're dealing with all these other things. And so like, if I'm telling students that, how am I also like modeling that, or how am I doing that and being congruent in my own life, right? Because we can't take every single battle. And so connecting them to the other resources, or, having conversations with the dean about, what are some things we can do to create more support for marginalized voices in academia.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because I think it's hard, especially as a woman of color, right? That I'm just like, I have to be there for them. But also, if you're not there for yourself, like, are you really equipped to be there for other people? And I really like what you said, Roberto, about like keeping your perspective on the environment you're in, because the environment changes, and then you almost have to be fluid enough to change with it and realize like, okay, well, this is different. So maybe I don't have to respond in such a well-balanced manner. Maybe I could just be very authentic about how I feel about this. But then also, you both really talked about how important it is to know your community. So either knowing your community in terms of the city or town you're in, which is a huge factor of what it may feel like on campus, but then also the community of your department and your college. So like knowing who's down the hall and knowing them well enough to refer students to them as maybe a better option. But then also, I think on the other side as a student as well, like knowing the faculty who also may not support students in that same light, and realizing that may also change some dynamics of what students are experiencing if they're in that class, or if they're your advisee and they're struggling with this person, but that person is still your colleague. So really, it's just such a weird political balancing act that is academia.
And we don't have that rule book. We don't have that hidden rule book. So
I know.
that makes it even trickier to navigate.
Yeah, and no one has time to write one because you should be writing something else.
Yeah, the thing is, there's politeness piece, all these different things you need to balance, right? And I think that when it's important, what you were talking about, Alexia, about that self-care and knowing, for example, there are people who I can talk to who are not in academia, whom I can vent to, because they will never be in my academic circles, right? Because they are, I don't know, they're archaeologists, all the type of doctors. So I can call them and vent and just take care of myself, right? Without worrying that I said the wrong thing or something in the circle that I'm in, you know what I'm saying? So I think that self-care piece is important to help you navigate those dynamics and those politics and all that. So, because it will always be there.
Yeah, and it's so nice to step away, like you just said. You know, for me, I love, talking to friends that have nothing to do with higher education, nothing to do with counseling. And then, I mean, I joke about it, but we do a lot of code switching as people of color, right? And so for me, sometimes it's like literally like just on the way to work, like, I guess for me, mentally preparing myself, and like I'll listen to Spanish music because it's like, you know, Alexia, like, don't forget where you came from. Like, you're Mexican, and that's okay, and you can be proud of that. And like, I joke about it, you know, with some of my mentees, but I'm like, yes, like I have to listen to mariachi music to like remind myself I'm Mexican, you know, because I step into the classroom or I step foot on campus and like, it's a whole different ballgame, you know, and like, for me, I'm just like still learning, like, how do I integrate those two, you know, like, how do I show representation, right? Like with like Latin art in my classroom, or I mean, in my office space and things like that. And how do I, you know, integrate those identities?
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that, because I always tell my husband and friends, like, when I went to like vent and just like curse, it doesn't feel the same if I do it in English versus Spanish. No.
Yes.
When I vent in Spanish, I feel so much better.
Yeah. So true. Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny for me because it's almost like I call it like my academic hood like personality, because I'm like listening to like some crazy rap music that like really is just for me to be like in a different mental space. So I could be like, sometimes it feels like preparing for battle. Like, like I'm about to walk in here and this meeting is going to be crazy and I need to drink this tea and be a different person. And then I can talk to my friends after, but then especially highlighting how important it is to have a network of people in your community that are not in your department, are not counselors, maybe know your work, so they could be academics, but they're not necessarily in your college even, just because it's like it's hard if you never create space where you feel like you can openly, authentically complain for even like 2 seconds about what you're really going through, even if you're not a complainer. Like, I'm really not a complainer because I'm like, we can handle everything that comes our way. Like, we're of the ethnic minority privileged class. So like, it's really not as bad as it could be. Like, but at the same time, I'm like, I want to sit here in like my office and like complain about like what a student said to me, what a faculty member said to me, like just little things. So you're gonna be like, okay, let me get that off my plate so I can come in as a different person.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just like,
and if we're gonna make it, we're gonna have to continue to do that, you know.
Yes, yeah. And I think it really reminds me of my colleague Jean Yerslin, Dr. Yerslin, who Roberto's met. But she always is like, something crazy will happen and it's almost like you want to be quick to respond, and you're just like, God doesn't want that for me. Like, Jesus doesn't want me to respond like that. Like, let me just sip this water. Like, it just like, so a lot of code switching. You're absolutely right, Alexia, a lot of code switching.
Yes.
So we spoke to this a little bit already, but I'm wondering for all of you, and it's fine if you haven't fully realized it, but when did you know in your like professional journey that you were no longer a mentee, but a mentor as well?
Ironically, I feel like that occurred for me even in my master's program, because I was in leadership positions, and there was just so little representation of people who looked like me in the spaces that I lived in. You know, I always lived in rural communities that were predominantly white, and so you know, for me it was always kind of like I guess like a no-brainer of like I'm just so passionate about yeah, like people having access to education, and not being like left in the dark, right? Because like I felt like I was left in the dark for so many years. And so yeah, like I just remember, you know, connecting with like I don't remember what it was called, like the cultural awareness something house on campus, but trying to connect with like students of color and saying like, hey, like you should really look into some of the master's programs that are available here at this institution and that sort of thing. And like going into those spaces. So I feel like that's where mentorship started for me, and it just like kind of has continued, right? Because it's like, well, if I can do these things and if I can break down these barriers, then I know like all these people behind me can do that. And then I also received a doctoral fellowship through MBCC, the Minority Fellowship Program, and that really like allowed me to connect with other people who looked like me who were doing similar things, and then I like do mentoring through them as well. And so I guess that's just kind of always been like a huge part of my identity is like again, like how do we continue like showing up and creating that access. And I guess it was because I just always looked up to my professors of like, I want to do that someday, you know. And I remember like my main mentor in my master's program, like, again, he would take me to conferences and like, I remember the very first time we went to a conference, he paid for my breakfast because we were presenting early in the morning. And I was like, oh, you don't have to do that. And he was like, yeah. He was like, but one day, like, you'll do that for a student. And that, I just, like, that stood out to me so much, you know, of like, oh, yeah, that's true. Like, we do have more resources and access, right, than our students do. And so, like, we can pay that forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think a good question, because I think I was doing mentorship without knowing I was doing it. You know, even when since I taught like high schoolers, you know what I'm saying, like thinking like talking about students of like, well, where are you going to go for college, and having the time to talk to them about that, and then asking about what was your experience, how did you choose a college. And I also taught high school in like predominantly, it was in Miami, which Miami-Dade was like predominantly, you know, Latinx, you know, Hispanic folks. So holding the cultural pieces too, like, look, I never left Miami for undergrad and master's because my parents wanted me to stay here, right? And it was culturally appropriate for me to do that. But I really want you to not do that. But I also respect and I understand why you don't want to leave home, you know what I'm saying? So I think I was doing it even at that point. I didn't realize I was doing that. And then through my doctoral studies, I think also like younger, because they did it, because the older students in the program did it for me. So I think I was doing it for their more recent younger students in the program as well. And And I think there's also something interesting. I don't know what it is. When you get like, again, those two letters after your name and you start teaching, that some students is like, you're like, oh, you actually think I have all these answers, and you're like, I'm gonna have to consult with somebody before I mentor you. I'm gonna have to get mentored. So yeah. So I think, and I honestly do appreciate that. I feel like the mentors I had, I still have them, and I can ask them questions about what to say, what not to say, how to respond to something. I mean, I have mentors. I have sent text message, be like, should I send this text message in response to X, Y, and Z? And they're like, maybe not this one word, but you know what I'm saying. So and I keep that in mind when I talk to my students. You know what I'm saying. On my mentees. So I think it's like a lifelong process. I never want to stop being mentor, because I feel like I'm gonna mess up the moment I stop being mentor. You know what I'm saying? And hopefully I can pass that on to my mentees as well. So
yeah, I love what you said, Roberto, about like you were doing it before you realized it. Yeah. That is so true for me with mentorship and social justice advocacy, because like I didn't have the language, right? But I grew up with parents who were very much activists, but like I didn't have the language to fit those experiences, right, that were modeled for me. And so it wasn't until my doctoral program that I like started ordering books on social justice advocacy, because all of my white peers like had that language, right? And I was like, well, that sounds like the stuff I'm doing, but you know, I had to like connect those dots. And I think it's the same with mentorship, because I was just thinking about how that's part of my pedagogy is like Laura Rendon talks about life mentorship, right? Like they're not just students. Like this is somebody that I'm probably going to connect to like for the rest of my life. And the goal is to eventually like invite them into your home, you know, after they've graduated, to eat a meal with you. And, you know, like, and there's so much of like our authentic selves that come into that experience. Yeah. And so I do see it like as lifelong mentorship that I've been doing for a really long time. I just didn't have the language for it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example, because I want to speak to two mentoring experiences I've had with both of you. So early on in my very young doctoral degree program, we had an opportunity to write a white paper, Roberto and I, for Pulse in what happened in Orlando. And I remember being like, you know, like I'm not Latinx, I'm not, I don't identify as anything other than heterosexual. And I was like, both Dr. Garcia and Roberto were like, yeah, like we need to be edgy in this. I remember being like, but how edgy is edgy? Like I remember being like, so like, I don't, you know what I mean? That same thing of being like, I don't want to speak for another community when I haven't had this experience myself. And that they were just like, you're with us, like it will be fine. And it ended up being like such a great experience. It ended up being just such a well-supported paper all through APA, which was amazing as well. But I remember being like, we're students, like, should we just be careful? You know what I mean? Like, I remember being like, maybe we should just like tone it in a little bit, and then be like, no, this is our moment. And so I think that I always come back to that moment of being like, okay, I do have opportunities to like take a step back, but then I also have to realize I have a lot of privilege and a lot of sway in the positions I have. And so using that as well, like if someone's going to give you a national platform, like you better take it. Like don't, like they may not give it to you again, right? So like I'm just like and so I feel like that really shaped my future in Division 45, but then all leadership, because now I'm just like yeah, I have this title, I'm just gonna say this, like, and then see what happens kind of thing, for better or worse. Like, and for better or worse, like there's been moments where I've been like, oh well, I should have toned that in, but it's too late now, like but then even for Alexia, when I first met you at Waces Santa Rosa, and I remember being like, yeah, I'm just like, I haven't talked to my advisor in like over a year and it's just whatever, like, and you being like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, is he doing what he should be doing for you? Like, and I was just like, yeah, I should tell him that stuff. And then sitting with him and being like, what am I doing? This is the worst idea ever. And then it ended up being like the best decision for me to have that conversation with him. But I'm like, it's that mentorship that happens like over a Zoom call or like in a random hallway. Like I think you told me that while we were just like waiting to go to lunch, like just a random opportunity. And I agree, like we don't realize we're mentoring while we're doing it, but it ends up being very impactful for the people we're talking to, and the relationships we have.
Yeah, and like those privileged positions, like you said, you know, because those were things that like, for me, I'm constantly reflecting on, we don't know what we don't know. And so I was very lost in a lot of my programs and I didn't know what I needed. So it was like, how do I even advocate for myself when I don't even know what I need? You know, because I've never done this before and all of those things. And then just being able to rely on my relational skills of like, well, I'm a relational person. Like, I'm gonna have to just put it out there, you know, with this person on my dissertation committee because like he's missing it and I'm feeling disconnected from him and I don't want that. And it's hard for me to like move forward in my work with him because there's this disconnection and I just need to speak to it. Like I need to trust myself and just speak to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what advice would you give someone looking to follow a similar career path as yours?
I find myself a lot of the time, you know, as I'm mentoring master's level students who want to go to a PhD program, and like the whole talk about, you know, well, what do you really want to do? Like, what is your dream career? And trying to sort that out because a lot of times they don't know, right? Like the difference between clinical psychology, counseling psych, counselor ed, like all of those things. And what I tell them about my job is like, you can try to fake it till you make it, but good luck because you're going to be around a lot of counselors. And like, even if, you know, for example, you go through your doctoral program and nobody challenges you, like at some point, I mean, for sure, students are going to challenge you. And so like, you need to be able to like really know yourself. And it's going to be a really difficult process. You know, like if you think your master's program was difficult, like this doesn't end. Every day when I show up to teach, or every week when I show up to teach social justice and diversity, it is so vulnerable. And I have vulnerability hangover and I have to not schedule any appointments after that class because we're going to be discussing so many difficult things. And like, if you want to be a counselor educator, like it's just going to be hard. Like academically, you're going to be fine, but you know, it's going to be really difficult and personal. You know, if you want to be authentic to yourself and the profession. And so, you know, you really need to like know that you do want to stand up in front of a classroom and teach about these really difficult things and try to model those things for students. And so, you know, if you don't like being put on blast, for example, then this may not be the best profession, you know. And for me, it's difficult because I don't like being the center of attention and that sort of thing. But there's like this really odd thing that happens where I guess like my passion for teaching like takes over. And like, I'm just like, I don't even care, you know, like I want to produce strong counselors who are working ethically and not harming clients. And so like, we're going to get like in the dirty, ugly stuff and we have to, and that is going to take me also challenging myself, right? Because if I internally, you know, as I'm being reflexive in class, if I internally have some fear come up, like I need to be able to be vulnerable and share that with the students of like, yeah, I had some anxiety come up as we were talking about this thing. Like what, you know, what is everyone else's experience? But like we're constantly in this vulnerable space. And so for me, I think that's something like if somebody wants to go into counselor education, for me, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's just difficult. Like you're going to find yourself reacting to a lot of different things. And like, how do you manage that? You know, how do you still show up for students? How do you still show up for your colleagues? You know, what does that look like?
Yeah. And honestly, like everything that's coming to mind for me on it can be summarized by what you said, being like authentic, you know, who are you? And it's okay for you to develop different aspects of yourself. I mean, hopefully you would do that, especially in a counseling program, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
You are, the different layers, you know, of the onion to peel and all of that. So it's okay to change your mind. But at the end of the day, what is going to make it authentic? What can you do to still stay authentic to yourself and still enjoy what you do, right? Like sometimes I write, like I tell people that I do my best writing and work at like 2:00 in the morning. That is so true. But you know what? I love that, you know, versus if I were doing something else and I had to do something at 2:00 in the morning, I would hate it. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, because authentically, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to do research, you know, and teaching. So that email at 2:00 in the morning, it feels very different than if I were maybe doing clinical practice 100%, you know what I'm saying? I had to get up at 2:00 in the morning to do a suicide risk assessment, something like that, you know what I'm saying? The way on that will be completely different, at least for me. So I think you're absolutely correct. I think authenticity, and not just at the end of the day, but, you know, looking back 20 years from now, would you still be doing these things that you were doing, you know what I'm saying? And if they do shift and evolve, are you still staying authentic to yourself? And they can shift and they can evolve, right? But again, are you still being authentic to yourself and being your whole self? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about like 20 years from now, because for me, I also think about not getting too comfortable. And I mean, I think that's something like as people of color, we're always kind of, you know, like we got our side gigs and things like that, right? But it's like, it's about like not becoming too complacent, right? Because it's like, even if I teach social justice and diversity for the next 20 years, I want that to look different because the field is always changing. Like that is my ethical responsibility as an educator. Like I can't just think like, oh, I've arrived and like I never have to pick up another book. You know, it's the language, for example, is constantly shifting. Yeah. And like if we don't know that, for me, it's just it's kind of like how we would say, like as counselors and clinicians, like you can never take a client further than you've gone. I think the same thing with teaching, right? Because it's like, how am I gonna like sit in front of a classroom and like be fake and act like I know what they're talking about when I have no idea? You know, that's gonna create a ton of mistrust in the classroom, you know, safety concerns, you know, just, yeah, disconnection altogether.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it stands out to me because it's not necessarily giving advice like, oh, these are the 5 things you need to do to be just like me. It's like, I challenge you to be authentic enough to make the best choice for what excites you. So like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What makes it not so crappy that you're up at 2 a.m. doing this work? But then also like, what excites you today, and being flexible enough to let that change over time so that in 20 years it still excites you, but maybe in a different way. Because I agree, we have seen it before. We see people who just feel like they're stuck where they're at, or it's no longer something they love to do and it's a requirement. And I love that you both said, you know, like, we're still counselors at the end of the day, and people will call you out on your crap. Like, people will straight up be like, you're not authentic. Like, I don't know what's going on with you, but like, I'm not getting that you want to be here. Like, all of these things, especially if you surround yourself with really good colleagues and mentors, they're the first people to call you on your crap, even when you probably know yourself, but you're just like maybe not ready. And then even moving forward, you know, how do you then display that to your students? Because it's really important to model that behavior so that they feel that they can challenge themselves and they can grow as well. Yeah. So mostly just because I'm curious, what are you currently reading? What are you digesting? Podcasts? Anything like?
Yeah. I love Code Switch
Okay.
podcasts. Or pretty much anything by NPR. But I was recently introduced to Rachel Cargle, and I am loving her work. So like, yeah, just following different people on social media and I guess expanding my awareness around different things. I'm currently reading a book about women in leadership. And then I have another book, Office Politics, that my roommate, who's also my best friend, just bought for me recently. You know, just because I'm still learning like how to navigate the higher education system. Because there's all these hidden rules, right? Like that we don't get access to. And so I'm still trying to learn, you know, how to find my voice in this space, and be authentic, right? And like, when is it too much? When am I like, okay, Alexia, like, you're exhausted and like that's a battle like you can't fight. So that's like the latest, I guess. But you know, I also have like tons of like racism with Without Racist is another recent read. Yeah, mostly looking for more stuff by authors of color and LGBT authors.
So for me, what I'm reading at the moment is, which doesn't sound like fun, but actually it is. So I'm part of the APA's task force that is revising the LGBT guidelines. So we have a meeting in DC on the 19th to the 22nd. So I'm like in the thick of reading all this different stuff that I had to prepare for that meeting. But what I just finished reading was a book on, I'm trying to remember the author, on cultural humility. But I have read different articles, but the book is very well, it's very good. And I'm not sure, I think the publisher is APA, either APA or ACA, but it's a really good book.
By Hook, and I can't remember the other authors.
Yes. It was a great, very easy to read, refreshing book, and it really legitimizes and kind of reinforces and validates these things that we're talking about.
I have that book at my desk, actually.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, well, I have that book in my office right now. Yeah. So it's Cultural Humility by Hook.
Yes.
Who else?
I can't remember the other authors.
Yeah, but it's like Hook, Davis, Owen, and D. Belair. I'm probably not saying that right. But it's Cultural Humility, Engaging Diversity Identities in Therapy. Yeah, and it's almost like all of his research articles in one text. And it's actually on Amazon. It's only $20. So
What?
it's actually, yeah, it was, yeah.
For it.
Yeah, so like you could get it on sale. So it may not still be on sale, but it's very like I feel that this is awkward because I'm a Division 45 board member, but don't get it on at APA. It's like $50 max on Amazon. So get it on Amazon.
I got it on Amazon, but I still paid 40 something for it. I guess I didn't get it on sale, but it's a great book. So
yes,
honestly, I borrowed it from a friend. So, Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that's funny. I'm like, I actually just presented on cultural humility for cultural competence and supervision using that book.
Nice.
Yeah. And another book that is by, I don't think I have that book, but that book is by, it's on multicultural supervision, and it has a ton of actually case studies in it, which cover supervision with like actual examples. And I'm like all about that rather than just theoretical point of view. So yes, thank you so much.
I'm like, that sounds like something I would definitely like to read.
Yes, I will send you the link for that, because I that book was $100 and I was like, oh, is it really worth it? But then I got it and I was like, gold. Like, this book is gold. Yeah. So I highly suggest that book as well. I will put that in the notes. So I wanted to wrap up before we give kind of closing thoughts. So today we talked about the difference of teaching at a liberal arts college versus an HBCU, different research on Latinx communities, both for LGBTQ, but also with addictions, which was very interesting. We talked about the difference between multicultural diversity and social justice, and that we really have to realize that diversity looks different in all spaces. And if we only have one of an identity, it's not very diverse. But then also the importance of, if that is the case, supporting and elevating their voices and allowing students to speak on their experiences so that they feel heard. Teaching pedagogy, that really comes from the idea of to sense and to think, which is my very American English version of it, because I don't know any Spanish at all. So thanks for that. And then process leads to content. And I thought that was such a highlight, is that even as educators, it's important for us to really talk about the content in a course, but if people are not processing the content, then we're really not teaching them anything to begin with. And then the importance of knowing your community, both inside your university and in the area, so that you can provide resources to students, and how lifelong mentorship has created opportunities for each and every one of us. And then how we continue to give that mentorship to others. So any final thoughts?
I don't have anything. I just want to say that I really enjoyed this experience, because it's really cool to see like the similarities in the work that all three of us are doing. That's just something that stood out to me. Like, I've never met you, Roberto, but it was really great. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to link up with him for some research. And like, because we have such similar interests, and it's like, there's so few of us. And I mean, I'm just curious, like, even, the interdisciplinary work, because you're a counselor, educator, but also a counseling psychologist. And yeah, just feeling really energized from this. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for, reaching out. I know it's on a Saturday, but still, this was a great time to connect. It was great to meet you, Alexia. Let's definitely connect about future collaborations. And and I guess final word will be, to keep on moving along as you do that, checking in with yourself about where you are in that moment and what you need in that moment, and reaching out to folks who can provide those spaces for you to process those things. So, yeah.
Yay! See, this wasn't so bad. You guys are all nervous. You guys are so great. So again, everyone, my name is Desa Daniel. I am a Division 45 student representative, and this was the Division 45 Virtual Mentorship Program webinar series. We're really excited about our video content as well as our podcast content. So please, please, please leave a comment, like the video, subscribe if you aren't already. I will have the bios for both Roberto and Alexia in the show notes. And so take a look at them, check out their research and everything they're doing. They're amazing people. And we are very excited to see you in the next episode. So thank you for coming, and I will see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.